Hi, I'm Melissa Eskue Ousley. I'm an Oregon Coast author, and just want to say thank you to the Boulder Bookstore for hosting me for this question and answer session about Constellations of Scars, my new novel coming out on June 9th from Midnight Tide Publishing. It is a dark fantasy with elements of horror, and it's set here in Seaside on the Oregon coast. It's about a young woman named Amelia who grows pearls under her skin. As you might imagine, a gift like that is both a blessing and a curse. It's kind of a painful thing to grow pearls under your skin. And in the story, Amelia's mother, Denise, is kind of paranoid and scared about life and is worried that her daughter will be abducted for her gift. And so she hides her away for a number of years, and as Amelia gets older, she realizes she has actually become her mother's captive. So she runs away to Seaside and joins a museum of human oddities and kind of finds a new family there. But she soon discovers that the world is actually much more dangerous than her mother feared. As far as inspiration for the book, it started out as a short story that was published in the North Coast Squid. That's a local literary magazine, and it received high praise from one of the judges, and so that really encouraged me, and I decided to turn that short story into a novel. And so it was also inspired by just, elements, seaside elements on the coast. I really love walking on the beach and looking at tide pools, and sometimes when you drive down the coast, you'll see just piles and piles of oyster shells. And so, I was just kind of thinking about, well, what would that be like if instead of an oyster growing pearls, it was actually a human being? And from there, the story just kind of developed. I always loved fairy tales, grew up on a steady diet of fairy tales. And so I really love those elements of magic in stories, the idea that magic always comes with a price. And so, if you have a gift, there's generally a downside or it costs something. And so one of the fairy tales that I was really thinking about as I was writing this is one about a goose who lays golden eggs. And I actually mention it in the book, but the story goes that there's this couple and they have a goose, and the goose happens to lay these golden eggs, and so they get rich with this goose that they have. But then they get greedy, and so they decide that they want to have all of the riches at once and end up killing the goose to get to the golden eggs. Well, as it turns out, the goose is just a regular goose. So once they kill the goose and open it up, there are no more golden eggs. So they have, because of their greed, they've lost this gift that they had. So I did not write the book during the pandemic. It was written before the pandemic, but I did use a lot of that time during the pandemic to refine it and edit and try to strengthen it where I could. The idea of the character being in isolation was just, I was thinking about what would that be like, if you weren't able to connect with people for a really long time, if you really only had one person in your life who was telling you what the world was like. And so the main character, Amelia, she starts growing the pearls at age 12, and so essentially from that point in her life, she's isolated. She doesn't have friends. It's just her and her mom every day, and so she has to kind of figure out what she believes. Her mother tells her what the world is like, and she has a window to the world through books and movies and that sort of thing, but she really doesn't have a mature, modern, a connection with people her own age or really know what the world is like. So when she runs away, she's got to figure that out. She has to, see the reality and reflect on that and see, how that compares to the story that she's been told about how life works. And I think that's something everybody has to do. As you grow up, you have to think about, what your parents told you, what you believe, and you have to decide for yourself, what do you believe, and how does the world actually work? And I think the other thing to think about with Amelia's character is, she's really unprepared for the world. She's never dated, she's never had any kind of mature relationship, so she's pretty naive. She has to kind of figure these things out and find her way and fight for her independence. So it's really kind of a coming of age story, but from a pretty different perspective, I think, than the usual coming of age story. So my writing process. Some people, when they write a book, they have a plot, they have note cards and storyboards and all of that, and I do not. Basically, I start out with a situation or a concept and some characters, and I just turn them loose. And generally, they're feral and they do whatever they want, and I'm just basically there writing the incident report. And so that's how my writing works. And that sounds really crazy, but one of my favorite books about writing is Stephen King's On Writing. And that's essentially what he does. So I feel like, coming from the master of horror, I feel like my methodology is solid. Yeah, I just kind of go with what the characters do. And I get to know my characters pretty well. And I try to think about what, who are they at their core of their soul, and what kinds of decisions would they make, and kind of go from there, hopefully staying true to their behavior and their dialogue, and what they would actually do. I never want to have a plot where I'm really like forcing these characters to adhere to that plot. I try to adjust as I go, and I might have an ending to a story in mind, but I'm willing to adjust that. If the characters go in a different direction, I'm willing to kind of adapt and change that to fit the story and be true to the story and true to the characters driving that story. I've been reading some really good books. One of my favorites is The Queen of Nothing from Holly Black. I really, really, really love Holly Black. Her stories are always so good. And that whole series that she's written, this is the third in the series, but it's so good. If you have not read Holly Black, you really should, because she's amazing. Another book I've really enjoyed it's actually a collection of short stories, and it's by Paul Tremblay, Growing Things. Really, really good. He does a lot of fantasy and horror, and I just love it. So that is two of the books I've been reading during the pandemic. I would say at the core of this book, it's about a person growing up and figuring out who they are and what they believe, and finding their independence, but also accepting themselves and accepting their flaws, and figuring out how to love themselves in spite of those flaws. And so I think that's really, what being human is all about, is figuring out what you believe, figuring out how to be yourself in this world, and really being authentic to yourself. So this passage from the book is from the beginning, and it's when Amelia and her mother first discover that she's growing the pearls. The pearl looked luminous. It seemed to glow under the harsh light of the bare bulbs in the rusty fixture over the mirror. There was something almost magical about it. It had come from my body, which was a revolting yet thrilling thought. I slipped the pearl into a cabinet drawer, hiding it until I could figure out what to do with it. 2 days later, other lumps on my shoulder and back swelled and festered. I would have wondered if they too contained hidden treasures, but my body ached so bad I could barely think. The slightest movement sent tendrils of pain down my spine. I stayed home from school. Mother drew me a hot bath and was helping me undress when it happened. The sores opened, one after another, spilling new pearls to the floor. Mom jumped back and shrieked. I groaned with relief as the blinding pain suddenly eased. Mom picked up one of the pearls, still slick with blood. Is this what I think it is? I nodded. I'm a human oyster. I didn't feel human, though. I felt like a sideshow freak. Mother's eyes were fearful, but her tone was angry. Don't be ridiculous. She gingerly placed the pearl on the countertop as though it might bite. It's true. I opened the drawer where I'd stashed the first pearl. I held it out to her. She touched it and then shook her head. No, they're not pearls. They're part of the infection you're fighting. Some kind of organic... She didn't finish the sentence. She just stared at all those pearls on the floor, including the one I held in my hand. There were 43 of them. Mom decided to have the first pearl assessed. It was the only time she took me with her. Mr. Whittier, the jeweler, studied it, gauging its worth. Big one, isn't it? 14 millimeters, high luster, round, free of any defect I can see. Where'd you get this, Denise? Indonesia? The Philippines? Looks like a South Sea pearl to me. How much is it worth? Mother asked. There was a hunger in her eyes I'd never seen before. It scared me. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you, Boulder Bookstore, for hosting me. Constellation of Scars is coming out in June. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks again.